situation on the ground in Egypt is changing moment by moment. For more insight, we're joined now by Reva Bhalla. She's a Mid-East analyst for Stratfor, which is the global intelligence company so many in the market look for guidance. Reva, we're looking at these pictures. We've been tracking them over the past few minutes because it's after curfew in Cairo, and we're watching these clashes between pro-Mubarak and anti-Mubarak demonstrators. Is there any sense that there's some organization around those pro-Mubarak supporters? They haven't been in the streets for 9 days.
Well, the pro-Mubarak supporters, they came out, some of them, on camels, on horses today. And if anyone who's been to downtown Cairo knows that you don't just see camels and horses lying around the city, that does take some coordination. And the timing of when they all kind of came flooding in the square is also pretty peculiar. So then the question is, who is really behind these? Obviously, these are supporters of Mubarak, but there are also a lot of people in the ruling party, in the old guard, who are afraid of seeing all of their economic stakes and their political perks go along with Mubarak, which seems to be something imminent right now.
Well, there is worry about cash supply, food supply because of these disruptions. We saw a statement from a key cleric out of Cairo today, asked for the demonstrators to return home. Who would they listen to? I mean, are we at the point where a show of force like this can really quiet the demonstrations?
So far, no. Again, the demonstrators appear unified on deposing Mubarak. They're pretty much divided on everything else, but that is the unifying point for them.
So we were talking about the tremendous amount of aid that the U.S. gives Egypt. That's a bargaining chip, right? I mean, is there the sense now that the military and who the military supports might be in question?
Well, again, the military is really key to watch here. If you watch the army on the streets right now, there has been considerable restraint. And to a certain extent, the demonstrations have helped over the past few days in applying pressure on Mubarak to go. Now, though, now that you have the influx of pro-Mubarak supporters in the streets and the potential for more violent clashes, that's when the military could be incurring more of a risk. So what we keep hearing is this idea that the military elite is trying to tell Mubarak that we've done everything we can for you, but the time to go is now.
The chant that this Friday was the day that Mubarak should exit, we heard over the past few days. Is there any sense that it is that imminent, that we could see the president step down now?
It's very opaque, but as we're seeing the confrontations in the streets intensifying, I think we could be nearing that point. You know, Mubarak has been pretty obstinate so far, and I think the general's patience is growing very, very thin at this point. So we're watching for any signs that they're actually going to make their move now.
How close are we to a food crisis? How close are we to a real economic breaking point here?
One thing that really caught our attention was when we saw reports of the port of Alexandria being shut down, or at least operating well below capacity. And that's really because the demonstrations there aren't people to load and unload cargo right now. Port of Alexandria is really the only vital port in Egypt. Some 80% of Egypt's goods come through that port. And you have to remember that Egypt imports 60% of its wheat. And the government keeps saying we have about 112 days worth of supply, but that includes wheat that's been purchased but not necessarily in the country yet. So, you know, that's normal for any country, but Egypt right now is, of course, in a crisis right now, and the threat to the distribution lines is something that needs to be watched very carefully.
Yeah, and we're watching wheat prices here in the U.S. trade that much higher. There is a lot of concern. Is there a sense, though, that the new government ministers, the finance ministers, the people who are supposed to help those food supply lines, those cash supply lines, do they have any control to truly open the banks?
It's really hard to tell right now. You know, in the past, Egypt has some precedents of bread rights. If you look at 1977, even look as early as 2008, where you had protests in the streets and long lines in front of the bakeries, people demanding their bread. At that time, you had the military that was able to step in and help take over distribution and make sure people were getting their supplies to contain the situation. Now we're in a point where the military is really stretched thin. They're not only having to worry about the demonstrations, they have to worry about Mubarak. They're dealing with the U.S. and Israel. They're trying to patrol the streets, and these aren't troops that are used to riot control at all. So, you know, this whole assumption that the military is going to be able to come in and stabilize the situation is really one that needs to be checked carefully, especially if we get to a point of a food crisis.
All right, Reva, thank you so much for your analysis.